Now, even with email, we still write and receive letters, and that means we're going to have envelopes to open. So here's a nice little letter opener I think you'll enjoy. Now, the interesting part of this is this leaf design here on the handle. It's all solid material. This happens to be cherry. If you have access to issue number 4, we had a feature on carving a leaf like this. So I won't go into too much detail at this time. After you have cut out your pattern, what I suggest is cut the waste away from where the blade is going to be. It's just going to save you a lot of time. And then glue it directly onto the board, and you'll be ready to carve. To determine what the handle is, I suggest, as I have so many times, to use modeling clay. In this case, I have just cut out a more or less a generic leaf, but then hold it in your hand and mold it where it's going to feel comfortable in your hand. And then this then will be the model for your handle. That way it's nice and comfortable in your hand. It'll fit very, very well. So now we can start the carving. The first step is to just mark your center line and then mark the outside curves. Just it helps you to keep yourself well aligned. Then I take a V tool and just make my mark down the center. Now this is cherry, so it's going to take a bit of carving. It's definitely not basswood. Now we can start the shaping. Now that I have starting to establish the shape, now I can start and do the hollowing. Just working down toward the center. Just keep nibbling your way down. Again, with this harder wood, it'll take a little bit of time, but there's no hurry. Now we're making a little bit of headway. It's beginning to look the way it should. Needs a little undercutting in here. You can see I've turned it around now, both so that you can see, but now the grain, it's a little easier for me to work with the grain. Whenever possible, try to learn to work with your left hand. Saves a lot of clamping and unclamping. Though this piece is a rather nice, hard piece. You really need a mallet for most of the work. Now I'm getting the rough shape done, and now I can start a little more refinement to get these curves nicely blending. This is probably as time consuming as anything is. Now you really have to pay attention to how the grain goes so you don't get any tear out. Get a nice curve. So the better you do that now, the better it will be when you're doing your sanding. You won't have to try to use your sandpaper to shape. And that's, in this hard wood, that can be very unpleasant. Now that we have completed the rough carving and semi-finishing with the tool surface, it's time, while it is still on the board, to do your undercutting. Cut in as far as you can go conveniently so that you won't have to do much of this after you get it off the board. Then it's a little more difficult. Then you'll have to perhaps even use a rasp, especially on this hard wood, to get the final undercutting. But for now, do the best you can. Keep all of your force down so there's little opportunity for you to break this loose from the paper. Then you would have to re-glue it. It won't be the end of the world, but as you can see here, I'm doing my undercutting as much as I can. Light cuts, just keep working your way down. It's no time to get too overdone. Even if this material doesn't come all the way from the board, don't be too concerned, because what's left on the board is still supporting and holding your carving down, so that's easy enough to cut away once you get it off the board. I just go in and just roll it down. Just go in as far as you can on both sides. This side, the high side here, will be the most, will take the most work. Now's the time to get the blade going. You probably want this to be sharp, so to speak, on both sides. You could make this just a straight taper so that this bottom side I'm on now is blunt and this top being the cutting edge, but I prefer to do it either way. I'll start and bring this down. And you can start from on the other side. I would leave this edge approximately 1/16 of an inch. Don't go much below that. You can always thin it out later on if you find out you have awfully thick envelopes and you can't cut through them. And again, this is another moment of decision. Do you want this completely rounded over, or do you want to have it as with a high point in the center, tapering to both sides, looking like a dagger? It's a matter of choice. There's no right, there's no wrong on this. This is a nice time to use perhaps a number 3 or even a number 4 gouge, and this will give you a slight curve on the blade, sweeping from that center high ridge right down to your edge. You're using this, in this case, a number 4, as a form tool to make that nice smooth curve from the high point right down. As you can see, there's a slight ridge now forming. I do have a way to go for thickness, but I'd rather sneak up on it rather than trying to do it all in one big cut. This is the time you're going to be doing that final determination, is the shape that you want. This is a particularly hard piece of cherry, but the result will be that it'll be it'll hold its edge, so to speak. And I like the figure in this piece of wood anyway. Now it's all been carved to shape. It's a good time to start your sanding now while it's being held down, and you can have better control. I'm starting here with 100 grit. You can start with something coarser, but that's just more sanding to get those marks out. This is not going to be a quick job. There's a lot of sanding here. This area in here, you want it nice and smooth. This would be a place to use a scraper. It's nice hardwood. It would scrape very nicely to get a flat surface. If you want to keep the curve, these little rubber forms are great for getting a nice smooth surface. You want to get as much of this done as you can. Otherwise, you're going to have to hold it in your hand, and that is a lot more difficult. And as you would for any carving, just start coarse, keep working your way down. Pay attention to these little areas in here. You don't want any tool marks. Now it's time to take it off the board using a flat, fairly thin chisel. Just start working your way around it. Work it under. Be very careful. Just take your time. There's no hurry on this. The faster you go, the sooner you'll break it. Here we go. I can hear it beginning to separate. Up, there we go. There. Now, and there it is, complete with the paper back. Now you'll have to go and start and work on the back. One way to take off all that paper is to get some coarse sandpaper, 80 grit, 100 grit, lay it on a flat board or attach it to a flat board, and then just lay it on it, and this will true up the base quite nicely. This area in here is going to have to be carved away. This was what was left over from your undercutting. The same here. Some of this undercutting could be done on the belt sander or on a drum sander. You can do a lot of sculpting here and then finish it off by hand. Again, get this blade nice and smooth or uniformly tooled, and then you'd be ready for your final finish. What I suggest on the finish is after this one has been all sanded very smoothly, put a coat of filler. I use just a spray lacquer, sand that out, get a nice smooth surface, then take some, in this case I've used a walnut stain, and I stained just the leaf so that there will be a color difference between the leaf and the blade. Otherwise, this has a tendency to blend right through and you don't get the separation that you really need. So stain this a little bit darker. I would suggest sealing it first so that any little nicks don't show up in the stain. Then you can go back and do your final finishing, and of course, sign it and date it, and you're done.